But what I'd like to speak with you about today is about the removals of other nations that are sort of embedded with the Cherokees and that we often ignore. We often don't think about their experiences and what they've been through. And I think, in looking at this title, The Long Journey of the Natchez People, we're, I think, want to consider removal as part of this very great arc of displacements of native peoples, involuntary displacements of native peoples in the East. The Natchez had endured more than a century of repeated displacements, removals from different places, and in this great sweeping arc, end up swept up in the Cherokee removals, having to go back past their original homeland. They were 2/3 of the way out to Oklahoma when they started, and then end up in the Cherokee Nation. This map just shows some of the sort of key points in the experience of the Natchez people, and you can see, from Natchez, Mississippi, which is the English pronunciation of Natchez, and then all the way down to Four Holes Swamp in South Carolina, in the South Carolina Low Country. These people in a series of moves and involuntary displacements, I think, through time, and this happens in a fairly short period in the first half of the 18th century. Initially, when the Europeans first encountered the Natchez people, they're here in the lower Mississippi River Valley on the Natchez Bluffs, one of the sets of great bluffs along the eastern side of the Mississippi River. And then 100 years later, they're up there near Gore, Oklahoma, at Natchez Town. And there's a lot that happens in between. This is a 1718 French map of the lower Mississippi River Valley and the native nations there. And you can see Natchez is very prominently represented there, and also a French establishment, Rosalie, and the colony at Natchez. When the Spanish had encountered Natchez or Natchez-speaking people in the entradas across the southeast in the 16th century, but we don't really get any kind of focused accounts or descriptions of the Natchez people until they're encountered by the French. LaSalle first makes note of the Natchez in 1682 in that great trip of exploration in the Mississippi River, but it's really in the 18th century, beginning of the 18th century, when they really come into focus for the French. And at that time, by that time, the Natchez were sort of unique in the southeast in as much as they had retained a great deal of the old traditional Mississippian cultural pattern. So these folks were still building mounds, using mounds, they had temples, and they had a hierarchical society. With a hereditary king, the great son, and a very highly structured social and political organization that was probably many of the native societies of the Southeast had once had this sort of organizational structure, but no longer did after all the various pressures of contact with Europeans and depopulation, etc. But the Natchez still retained this. And this is the system that collided with the French. The French decided that that land around the Natchez Bluff was first a very strategic place for establishing control of the Mississippi River Valley and establishing Louisiana. They wanted to set up on all of these bluffs coming down the river and create a corridor, a connection from the Illinois country all the way down to the mouth of the Mississippi and the establishment of New Orleans. So Natchez becomes a target spot for French settlement and French colonization. And the Natchez people are not very happy about this. They've already been in contact with the English. They have trade relations with the English. And the English, in a typical English fashion, are saying, don't let the French come in there. And so there's already these relationships with the English. The French come and establish on the bluffs at what's now Natchez, Mississippi, establish a colony there and various what we call concessions land, sort of blocks of land they have extorted from the Natchez people. And they're continually sort of demanding different things from the king of the Natchez. They demand labor, they demand tribute, they're demanding land. They've established Fort Rosalie. There are several uprisings of the Natchez against the French establishment that occur. And they're relatively minor in scale in 1716, but in 1729, there was a pretty well-organized conspiracy among the various Natchez towns, and they had their short sticks and counted their broken days, and then all fell on the French at once. And they were able to almost completely extirpate the French. They fell on Fort Rosalie and all the outlying plantations in one fell swoop, and killed most of the French men, took most of the women and children and French slaves, both African slaves and native slaves, hostage. The French down in New Orleans feared that this was a much larger sort of pan-Indian conspiracy. So the first thing they do is they check with the Choctaws to make sure they're not in on this. And of course, the Choctaws are not, because they're no friends really to the Natchez, and especially not to the English allied people. But then they immediately go around and start massacring the petit nations, the small nations of native people right around New Orleans, just to get them out of the way for fear that they have joined in with the Natchez. There are a couple of Frenchmen who had made it down to New Orleans and told the story of what had happened at Natchez. And so the French are like, okay, we have to reestablish control. There's a French expeditionary force that comes back into the Natchez country in 1730 and lays siege to the Natchez towns, the Grand Village, the great village of the Natchez, and they establish forts right outside forts that the Natchez had established. Forts that the English had shown them how to build. They were built in an English pattern. So they laid siege to these forts. And after a couple of weeks, they managed to overrun these things, but not before most of the Natchez managed to escape in the middle of the night. They pull a fast one on the French, and they get across the river into Louisiana. So the French managed to capture some Natchez. They take some folks down to New Orleans and publicly execute them. They send other people into slavery in the West Indies, but then they are hot to pursue what they see as the folks who are responsible for the attack on Fort Rosalie at the Natchez fort that, let's see if I can point it out, it's right up there. The Natchez fort that's established a hidden fort on the Louisiana side of the river on Sicily Island. They attacked that in 1731, and it's sort of the same thing. The French, I think, have trouble staying awake at night, maybe, and they can't watch all the time. And while there were some all-out battles, and the Natchez suffered great losses, there was a sizable contingent of Natchez people that escaped from the attack on Sicily Island, and they escaped all over the place. They just scattered. But a lot of these folks go to the Chickasaws. There are many people, and there's probably some pretty good evidence, that the Chickasaws had actually been behind the Natchez Revolt of 1729, or at least sort of bankrolled it with guns and ammunition. And so the Natchez flee, many of them immediately to the Chickasaws, who were the great powerhouse of the kind of the Louisiana region, Mississippi region, or as the French would call it, all Louisiana, and established among the Chickasaw towns. So, for instance, Brad Lee told me that this town here, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. There is probably a Natchez town name. So they're in the midst of the Chickasaws, and by now the French are just hopping mad. They're boiling over. And so they organize expeditions against the Chickasaws. The idea is to punish them for their role in the Natchez revolt and to force them to hand over all of the Natchez to the French. And of course that would be anathema to native rules of hospitality and protection of your guests that you have taken in. And so the Chickasaws vow to protect the Natchez. That's not necessarily what they tell the French. They say, oh, yeah, we'll send them all to you. No, we've killed them all. No, we'll send them all to you. So there's various stories that are coming out to the French when the French are trying to assemble these expeditionary forces. The first attack, 1736, right? That's correct. I got to get that story straight for all of our Chickasaw friends here. Kurt will straighten it out. It's a miserable defeat for the French. There are accounts of when they approached the Chickasaw towns, and the Chickasaws had built forts. They have forts, and they had a bunch of English traders around. Some of these are English-style forts, but some are traditional forts. And they begin rolling up artillery. And the Chickasaws are looking out from these forts and saying, this is not going to work. We've got to do something different. So the French are rolling up with thousands of Choctaw allies. I think there's about 1,600 French continental troops here. And the Chickasaws simply throw the gates of their towns open and come rushing out, men and women, onto the field, and they roll over the French. The French have never seen anything like this before. The men have firing line and put the French into flight, and the women are firing on, beating on kettles with axes and singing, and then polishing off the wounded on the field like that. So the French are completely terrorized. Word gets back to France. The king in France is absolutely mortified that here is, as they say, the sauvage have defeated a French army in the field. This is unheard of. And so they begin carefully assembling this expedition against the Chickasaws to go back in and attack them in force and completely reduce the Chickasaws at that point. And it's sort of about that time that the Natchez are really becoming sort of an attractive nuisance, As house guests, it's coming at a price for the Chickasaws, and so they're saying, guys, you may actually want to move on. Actually, a lot of Natchez had already moved on. We see that even by 1733, groups had fled over on this the path to Carolina. They fled over to the creeks, to the Abeka, and settled in. Some had settled on Tallahatchie Creek and become integrated into the Creek Nation. And still others had gone on to Carolina. Some had gone to the Cherokees. This is Abeka here, and the Natchez town was right up there for a century after that. And some had gone on to the Overhill Cherokees up near Choda and Great Tellico there. Still others had been reduced by the French, put into submission, and there's some indication, as we see on this map by Bowen, but there it says the Natchez. This is where the Natchez formerly were, Natchez, Mississippi, and then way up there it says remainder of the Natchez. That location is right here on the River Margot, which is now known as the Wolf River. So they were on the Chickasaw Bluff here, at least for a short period of time, maybe. That's where the French wanted to put these reduced portions, these subdued portions of the Natchez, was to put them here on the Chickasaw Bluff. So that's our tie into Memphis for this. That's all you get this time. And I'm I'm going to focus as we move forward on the Natchez who end up, in fact, the majority of Natchez end up in the Cherokee Nation. And end up sharing the lot of the Cherokees as it develops in the 18th and 19th century. So, this view of the Cherokee Nation, and particularly in this period in the mid-18th century when Chota is sort of the great capital and the political capital and great white town of the Overhill Cherokees. There's also a movement of Natchez down to a place in South Carolina. What the Natchez are trying to do is to go to anybody who is firmly attached to the English and very anti-French. They don't want anybody wavering, so they want to reach out to native nations, get native nations to take them in who are firmly attached to the English because they're going to prosecute a war, an eternal war against the French from there. This place, what's called Footholds, is down in the South Carolina low country at the head of the Yellowstone River. A community of Natchez moves there onto a plantation that's supplied to them, and the governor of South Carolina then puts the Natchez there under the Catawbas. He says to the Natchez king who comes in, he says, "You are answerable to the Catawba king." And from now on, I want the reports to come from the Catawba king. They weren't very good house guests while they were down there, apparently, because one group of Catawbas came to check on them at some point, and they got drunk, and killed them, and then the Catawbas were going to wipe out the Natchez, and the governor intervened to get the heads of the people who killed them and send them back up to the Catawbas, and they recognize them because of their tattoos. But ultimately, things calmed down, and they remained there in the Yellowstone River Valley. In fact, their descendants are still there today, unrecognizable, but the descendants of those Natchez people are still there. Just sort of another view of the Four Holes Bridge up there on that swamp off of Edisto River. And for a long time in that area, they said they had no permanent towns. They were sort of shifted back and forth in camps. And when they say camps, they're talking about these shelters, lean-to shelters when they refer to camps. So they said that for almost 50 years, the Natchez just lived in camps there at Four Holes. We turn back to the Cherokee Nation and sort of the administration of the Natchez who go there. They first established in the Overhills, and the one local indication that we still see on the landscape there in the Overhill country in eastern Tennessee is there's a place off Tellico River, just out from Bonor, that's called Natchez Creek. And it's called that because the Natchez town was up in that area. Here's a view of the nation from 1762. The Overhill in this area, so you get Chota, and also Great Tellico, which is another location that Natchez are in, and the Natchez Creek is right up there, that area. Many of the Natchez, at least initially, went to the great white town of Chota. And so we see communications with the English about the Natchez have arrived. Even as we said, even before these French expeditions, and certainly immediately after the first expedition against the Chickasaws, we see a sort of a movement of Natchez people toward the Cherokees to get out of the reach of the French. For instance, Bienville is noting in 1736, he says, the English induced 80 Natchez families who, after their revolt, had retreated to Carolina. Then he says they got them to return from the Cherokees back to the Chickasaws. And that was some of the people he was after. In 1837, the Mingo Uma said there were still almost 130 women, Natchez women, who had gone to settle among the Cherokees. They told the French, well, we sent a message to the Cherokees, just kill them all when they show up. And that made the French happy, and no blood was shed, and they end up there among the Overhills. And as I said, there at the great beloved town or white town of Chota, where we have some physical evidence of the presence of the Natchez people there. Excavations at Chota, Tenacity in the 1960s and 1970s were fairly extensive, and some of the deposits, I'll give you an idea of this. You see, these are pit features that are filled with garbage. When you're done with the pit, you want to fill it in. So you fill it in with trash. And this is right here, Chota. And some of the pits around the townhouse had a mixed amount of trash. This pottery is very, very distinctive of the Natchez pottery potting tradition. This is called father-made in size. In fact, these particular sherds were actually made in Mississippi. The clay is Mississippi clays. The timber is timber from Mississippi. These are pots that were brought from Mississippi to eastern Tennessee by the Natchez refugees who came in. There's an account, some French who come into the Cherokee towns. For instance, Bonnefoy in 1741 comes in and he says, well, the first thing, when he went into the towns, he saw in Great Tellico 4 launches who were there, and he recognized them as people that he had run as slaves in Louisiana. And so the whole time in his account, he's trying to hide his face like this, because he knows they'll just come crack him on the head. You know, he's at their mercy. He's hiding their face and trying to stay away from them the whole time he's there. But later, he's up at Chota, and he said, saw that there were 15 notches there, and some of them came to his cabin and said they were going to go out hunting among the Chickasaws. So they were going to go out to the Chickasaws and go hunting and bring back 15 of their men who were still there. So this movement doesn't happen all at once. It's just sort of back and forth between these English allied nations. He also asked him if there were still some of the Natchez among the Ouachitas, west of the Mississippi River, and they told him that all that had been there were taken captive, but that the rest of them had rejoined them there among the Overhills. As was the case among the Catawbas, they were not the greatest house guests among the Overhills, apparently. Some of the Overhill headmen, they wanted to sort of walk the line. They wanted to balance things out and get the best deal possible, and they were willing to talk to the French to make the English come to their milk. And so the Overhills were doing that, and that was the last thing that the Natchez wanted to see. And so we see this account coming from John Norton, who's there 1807 among the Overhills, and so he learns this as traditional history from Cherokee folks, that the Natchez had been there. They had their own town, which was presumably on Natchez Creek, and this is probably as a result from some negotiations that had taken place with the French. They get all bent out of shape with Chota, is what Norton says, but I think it might actually be Great Tellico. He says they hatched out a scheme to cut off the town. That means to massacre the town. You're in the middle of these people, and you're going to massacre one town. I'm not sure they thought this through very well. So their idea was they were going to invite the Cherokees from Chota in this account to their townhouse, to a dance, to a big dance, get everybody inside, and then kill them. Simple plan. They had already done this in Mississippi with the Tunicas. It was a plan that had worked before, but you don't keep using the same trick over and over. Because there was a Cherokee woman in the Natchez town while these guys were talking about it in their townhouse, and she spoke the Natchez language. She overheard him. She goes back and tells her brother, who's the head man in Chota, and he says, gets everybody together and says, okay guys, we're going to go to this dance, but we're not going to go inside, and you're going to keep your weapons on you. So they go dance with the Natchez. They get done, and they say, we have had such a great time. It's been delightful, and we'd love for you to come over to our place next week for a dance. And the Natchez fall for it, hook, line, and sinker, go in, and they're attacked in mass in the town, in the Cherokee town. Numbers are captured, numbers are killed, and the rest flee. And they flee across the mountain from Chota, or I think more likely Great Tellico, they talked more regularly with the French, across the mountains into the valley towns, where The people at Hiwassee, under the advisement of Cornelius Daughtery, the trader who was around the bend, took in the Natchez and protected them, and almost went to war with the Overhills over their pursuit of the Natchez people. So finally, the Natchez had found this sanctuary among the Cherokees there. We don't know the exact time frame of it. It may be the late 1740s or early 1750s, but it's somewhere right in that time period when this occurs. So the Natchez that had been in the Overhill country are all sort of pushed out and come into the valley towns there, that area around Murphy, North Carolina. And they initially settled at Hiwassee, so that when Christopher French comes through and writes his account, well, he doesn't come down there, he's writing an account of these towns, and it's part of the Grant expedition, 1761. He notes that Hiwassee is the largest town in the valley, and is inhabited by Cherokees and about 60 families of Natchez Indians who were drove from their country by the French some time ago. So we see very clearly by 1760 that they are established at or adjacent to Little Hiwassee or Peachtree, the Peachtree site there in the Overhill country. And just a map to orient you, here's the North Carolina-Georgia line, Murphy at the upper left-hand corner, and then Hiwassee, which you see if you drive along Road 64, and many of you have taken a tour of that area know that site of Hiwassee. According to James Mooney and his informants in the east, the Natchez town that was there was called Guavlati, or that's a type of frog, so it was some sort of frog town there. That the Natchez were either adjacent to Hiwassee. I suspect they were up on some higher ground, as was their custom in settling in Mississippi. Some of these higher ancient terraces up Peachtree Creek. By the late 18th century, the Natchez people had moved away from Hiwassee town and into a town that had been sort of occupied off and on by Cherokees and different folks around the bend in the river. And those of you who have taken a tour around there, you know the mission farm that we visited. That's the mission farm. This place that Cherokee folks call a Studio, which was where there's a door in the river, and that refers to this stone, this across from that site, and the hole there in the river, the deep hole there is the door where you access everything that's down in the water in the beneath world there. But this was a very special place to Cherokee people and apparently to Natchez people as well. I know the first time I visited this rock with a Cherokee informant from the west, and he just sort of looked at it and he says, "I smell Natchez." He thought this was the business of Natchez here. But this probably long predates the arrival of the Natchez at that place, but it became associated with the Natchez people there. They remained there at Oklahoma Studio, or near Aglory, which is there at the mouth of Brasstown Creek. According to Mooney, and Mooney bases this on information from James D. Wofford, who had been around there as a boy. He was one of the assistant conductors on the Great Immigration. And Wofford lived to be a very, very old man in the West, and was talking to Mooney. He said, yeah, the Natchez lived up there until they established the Baptist mission. Apparently they didn't want anything to do with the Baptists. And moved away. That would have been 1819. And they moved from that place on Hiwassee River up to Gunlog Creek on tributary of Brasstown Creek. And they founded this Guavlati town there, which is the location that, according to Mooney's informants, Henry Smith and other folks who were alive at the time and had known Natchez people there, So this is where these folks were at the time of the forced removal of 1838. Now they have, for all intents and purposes, it has become part of the political organization of the Cherokee nation state. So they are part of the Cherokees for all intents and purposes at this point in time. Although they maintained a separate cultural identity for a very, very, very long time. Even as late as removal, Wofford notes that these people still spoke Natchez. Many spoke Cherokee, most spoke Cherokee, and some spoke Muskogee as well. But Natchez was still their primary language, even as late as removal. Henry Smith told Mooney that, to all outward appearances, they would have looked Cherokee, they dressed as the Cherokees, they lived in houses as the Cherokees, and so we have to figure that the U.S. Army knew no difference when they came through, arresting people in June of 1838, summarily grabbing people from their homes and from their communities, and so the Natchez there and on Upper Brasstown Creek were swept up in this initial sweep on June the 12th that pulled people out of the Brasstown Creek Valley and took everybody down to Fort Butler at Murphy, North Carolina. So in amongst all the Cherokees were all the Natchez people. They're a little hard to document there because they don't show up on the War Department census of 1835 with Natchez names. Maybe they show up with Cherokee names. But there are not a whole group of Natchez names on Upper Brasstown Creek at the time of the War Department census, nor on the property valuations of 1836-37. We just don't, they are invisible to those record sets. We do see some folks up there in spoliation claims who have names that are very obviously not Cherokee names. And I only suppose they're Natchez names. From right into the area where this Natchez town was. These folks all come into Fort Butler, which is the headquarters in North Carolina for the removal. And all pulled into the fort there. This is a list, a roster made. And there are a few names on this roster that's from the second group that leaves out from Fort Butler. This includes all of the people that we know of from Brasstown Creek Valley. There's a few sort of questionable names there that may be Natchez names. They're marched across the Unaka Mountains, over what we know as the Unicoi Turnpike Road, ultimately through Athens and down to Fort Cass, in parties of the North Carolina Cherokees. End up in Fort Cass through the summer of 1838, and then depart, I would suspect, mostly with Sequoyah's detachment. All these other folks from North Carolina, the folks who are primarily from Brasstown Creek, and take the overland northern route to eastern Oklahoma. And if they work with the Sequoyah detachment, this would be their arc of travel. Sequoyah's detachment, these folks are mostly pulled together on June 13th at Ed Floyd, and then disband at Beatty's Prairie on February 2nd, 1839. The Natchez, though, settled down on the Illinois. So you get a settlement, a group of these people, if they did come and sort of disband at Beatty's Prairie, they moved far to the south to establish their settlements near the Creek Nation and very near to where Bickertown was and where the Natchez who were in the Creek Nation had settled. So they settle along that line. So there are the Cherokee citizen Natchez and the Creek citizen Natchez, but they're living in very close proximity to each other when they settled there in this area out from Tinkeller, right in there. And this is no news to most of you folks, I think, here where you have Natchez Town right out here, still today, as you drive around. They established sort of some of their old township structures. By the end of the 19th century, you see the Medicine Springs stump ground established there, and the practices of the Natchez greatly informed the resurgence of the stump ground movement with Redford Smith in the period of Ohio. We see some of the ethnographers from the Bureau of American Ethnology going, as they visit the Cherokees, they're also visiting the Natchez because they want to, or descendants of the Natchez, because they want to document sort of, in that view, sort of the last of this culture is their idea. And visit folks like Creek Sam, who's a great traditionalist, and Nancy Taylor, who is the last known fluent speaker of the Natchez language. The Natchez language is no longer a spoken language, but there are some fairly good records of it. The descendants of the Natchez people are obviously still around Natchez town today. And as a nation, I think the Natchez nation has sort of fallen on hard times. I don't think the for sale sign actually has to do with Natchez nation. But I thought it was quite a juxtaposition when we snapped that photograph. I got to thank Troy Wayne for touring me around there through Natchez town a couple of years ago. And sort of as a last point, awareness of this connection to the Cherokee of North Carolina is not dead among the descendants of the Natchez people, the people who are Cherokee citizens. And so years ago, a Natchez descendant, Archie Sam, which some of you may well have known, was very interested in Natchez heritage, came back to North Carolina and got up. This was in the early 80s, got together with one of our sort of founding members of the Trail of Tears chapter in North Carolina, Mary Ann Thompson, who was very knowledgeable about the local landscape, and said, I want to go to the old Natchez town where we came from, the place that we immigrated from. And he said, I've been told about this place, and I need to go back and see this place. And she first takes him to Hiwassee, that first settlement there. And he gets out there and looks around and says, no, this is not it. This is not the place. Then she takes him to Upper. And he looks there and it's a beautiful spot and he says, no, this is not the place at all. And then she takes him way back here in the sticks to Upper Brasstown Creek to Gumlaw. And he gets to the spot and looks around and says, this is the place I was told about. This is the place that was explained to me. And what was important to him is this is the place where the medicine that went to Medicine Springs came from. So he saw this place as really kind of the origin of his people in Oklahoma. Even though he's quite a historian and very well aware of this arc of movement all the way from the Mississippi River around to this spot, this is what he identified as being their old homeland. Their old homeland among the Cherokee people. And so, to close, I would say there was this enormous arc of movement beginning in 1729, when these folks were displaced, or 1730, when they're displaced from their home on the Natchez Bluffs, or Natchez Bluffs there on the Mississippi River. And the arc, it goes all the way around to South Carolina, back out over the northern route, and ends up at Natchez Town, outside Thor, Oklahoma. So I think that illustrates the many very, very diverse paths that we see the native people ending up coming to the Indian nations in eastern Oklahoma as part, embedded in the 5 civilized tribes. So their stories of removal are part of the stories that we want to know and we want to tell as part of the Trail of Tears. So, thank you. And we probably have a minute or two for questions. Yes.
You were saying that a detachment left on June 12th, 1838.
They were taken by troops. So I identified that moment. Taken by troops is when they lose their liberty, and that's when their removal begins.
Well, my question is whether they're walking to get on keelboats to go down to the cave and then test on land. That was about the time that Lieutenant D
Cherokees.
That was about the time, but because these folks were sort of embedded with the Cherokees in North Carolina, and the Cherokees in North Carolina all end up at the agency at a time when the river track has stopped, and they all end up in overland detachments. There were a few people who split off into some other detachments, and I can't say that exclusively everybody went by land, but almost everybody went by
This was
land.
the start of the 100 route.
Yes, sir. And
Dr. Biggs, where is Medicine Springs?
Troy, where is this? I mean, it's right in there close to Gore, but I haven't been to the location. I don't know the exact location. Supposedly when folks settled there, it was a sulfur spring. And they said that you could, as they made medicine out of the water, would clarify. And that's why it's called the Medicine Spring.
I know where there's a sulfur springs, and that's the reason I was asking. I was wondering if possibly that might have been their side.
People using that location well within my lifetime.
I read somewhere that one of the companies that's battling the horseshoe was hostile. Is that true? You know?
That could have been, but there were very well, would have been Natchez on the other side as well. The Natchez along the creeks were part of the Red States. So we may have had people on both sides of that conflict. Yes, sir.
Given that wide arc that you described, have you seen or heard of any other descendants that may have been displaced from the Chickasaws or any other groups that they lived with?
I'm sure there has to be, but among the Chickasaws, they became Chickasaw. Just as, among the Cherokees, there are Cherokee people of Natchez descent. There are Natchez descendants among Eastern men as well. Mooney encountered he said in 1790, there was one woman there who still spoke the Natchez language. So, there was great sort of cultural retention going on there for 60 years after the time of the movie.
There's no other community that would have stood out as significantly Natchez in the culture.
Right, not as far as I know. And the group at Four Holes Swamp is sort of completely blended into the local population there.
When they were dispersed by the French, did they lose a lot of that Mississippi and culture?
That was really hard for them to do. They lost a lot of the sacred paraphernalia that they had when the French attacked the Grand Village the first time. To illustrate their culture, one of the things they escaped with were baskets full of the bones of their kings, and took those with them. They saw that as important, even in their escape from that place, to take those along with them. And so I'm sure they tried as hard as possible to retain that structure, but as they're broken down repeatedly and losing, the French wanted to make sure that the close relatives of the Great Sun were sent off into slavery to prevent the rise of the Natchez again. But I'm sure the remnants of that organization hung on for a long time, which made it somewhat difficult for them to integrate with these other groups.
More mound building?
Any more round?
Mound building.
No more mound building. Yes, sir?
In this middle picture up there, the Tom Phillips painting, it shows, like you was talking about, the incorporating some of the English forts. It shows a fort up there on top of the bluff, on the right-hand side there. And that would be the second Chickasaw bluff, which is ruins of Fort Prudhomme, or this picture includes that, but later on, the French names they refer to the ruins of Prudhomme.
This was a very important area in that period, and that's why the arc of the Natchez and of many other people, sort of sweeps through, I think.
Brett, were there any physical appearances that were different between the Natchez people and the Cherokee people?
You know, all the early descriptions that you see of Cherokee people by the English who were really runty, you know, they were just little runny guys. They talk about how big they are. They also talk about how big they are compared to the other nations. You know, that the Cherokee men especially are really big compared to many of these other nations, and it sort of stood out that way. So that would be one way to differentiate it. When the governor of South Carolina sends, this is a long story that I won't tell, but when they end up with the heads of the Natchez that killed the Catawbas, they have to send them up to the Catawba Nation to prove that you know, this is justice or vengeance or whatever has been done. And so he has his surgeon pickle these heads in a keg of rum. And then they're sent up to the Catawba king, and they bust open the keg and they pull out the heads and set them up. And they can recognize who these people are by the tattoos on their faces. They know that they've got the right individuals because of their distinctive tattoos they have. Which led me to wonder what happened to the rest of the rum. But, all right, well, thank you very much.